Good evening once again and welcome back to the second part of Bottomline Africa. And before we start our discussion tonight, the Ebola epidemic, now the Kenya health authorities have begun screening travelers seeking to enter the country following an outbreak of the deadly disease. Nigeria has also increased screening tests at airports and other points of entry as a precautionary measure. So tonight on our Twitter poll, we're asking you, do you think enough is being done to fight the Ebola virus in Africa? And just to make us understand what exactly this virus is all about and the steps that, researchers have taken to perhaps find out a cure for this disease, I'm joined in studio by Dr. Bernhard Zugutu, who is the chief researcher from Cambridge. I'm also joined by Peterson Washira, who's a clinical officer. He had served in both Liberia and Sierra Leone, I believe, in the 2014 when there was an outbreak there. And joining me by way of phone is Merdi Baraka from the DRC. But before I join Merdi, good evening, both Dr. Ogutu and Peterson Washira.
Good evening. Good evening.
Yeah, let me begin with Merdi. Merdi is joining me from the DRC, the epicenter of this disease, by way of phone. Now, Merdi, if you could hear me, good evening. Welcome to the program. The numbers we had from yesterday is that at least 17 people have lost their lives because of this deadly disease in the DRC. Have the numbers changed so far?
Yeah, so good evening. First, there is no change. There is no increase on the people, that number that were communicated yesterday. So we feel on standby.
Merdi, I'm sure you've witnessed some of the developments there because you're in DRC. How's the response like? Have the government perhaps jumped in? Have some of the humanitarian agencies jumped in? And have they declared a public health emergency? Because, people think that that should be the first step.
Yeah, so the reaction of the government was to first equip that place with special equipment for treatment and to contain that disease and stop the cases that were already seen in the place where there was Ebola. So there was also two NGOs working in the health sector, like OMS and MSF. These are two big NGOs in Congo, they went in the place to see what they can do to stop that, to control that disease, so that it will not affect other provinces.
Yes, Merdi. And of course, it's everyone's hope that they bring this disease to an end. And I'm sure you've interacted with people there. What are they saying about the outbreak of this disease? Because 17 is a very huge number. Are they in fear that maybe the disease might spread further?
So, the problem is that they discovered that there is that it's a new epidemic that is coming from that part of the country late. So that's why that number increased, and the government they went directly to the place and tried to contain that epidemic. And right now, we hope that they have equipment to face that challenge. That's why there is no so the number of people who are attended has been stabilized, and they've put under control everything. So that's what the military said.
Thank you very much, Merdi, for your input. That is Merdi Baraka joining me by way of phone from DRC, a country that reported 17 cases of Ebola. They all died yesterday. Now in studio, once again, I have Dr. Ogutu and Peterson Washira. Doc, let me begin with you. And it's always said that this is one of the most dangerous viruses known to man. It kills about 90% of the people who, get it. And part of the problem is that little is still known about this disease.
Thank you very much. I think it is not that little is very much known about the disease, because I think from the first time we had the first outbreak in the 1970s, and this was also the first recorded outbreak, which was in the eastern part of Congo, from where the virus got its name from River Ebola in eastern Congo. And I think there has been quite a lot of work around it, and there has been quite a bit of characterization of the virus to really know where it is, and even the current outbreaks, people are able to try to track to possibly get where the source of possibly where the virus is coming from and whether it is related to previous outbreaks that had happened before. And I think this has been done well, and I think there's quite a lot known about the virus. It's just like other sister viruses like the Marburg virus, which also cause hemorrhagic fever. And I think the main thing is that most of these viral fevers tend to be quite progressing rapidly once people start developing symptoms and require quite immediate attention for supportive care. Just like most of the viral diseases, these are viruses that we still don't have definitive treatment that can be used once somebody contracts the disease, but you will most of the time provide supportive care. And within the last couple of years, especially following the outbreak we had in West Africa, there's quite a lot of work that was done. And globally, I can say the scientific community went through quite a lot of rigor to develop the vaccines against Ebola virus, which were fast-tracked around the globe, everybody trying to work to beat the deadlines and make sure that we had something that could be used for the future outbreaks. And I think this helped a lot in trying to get people close to what is done. And even the African governments have really consolidated their efforts, and some of the things that have pushed the emergence and possibly setting up of the African CDC is basically some of these outbreaks, so that we can have a surveillance program across African countries that can allow us possibly to pick some of these outbreaks early enough and control them and stem them from spreading like what we had in West Africa in the 2014, 2015, when we had the last Ebola outbreak.
Yeah, and speaking about West Africa, Dr. Guto, let me engage Peterson Washira, because he has served in West Africa, to be specific, Senegal and Sierra Leone during that outbreak you had mentioned earlier. Now, Peterson, in the research, it's already indicated that Ebola is a very preventable disease. But why do we keep on seeing these outbreaks? For example, in DRC, I believe this is the 8th time.
Thank you, Yusuf, and thank you for having me. I think I didn't get your question. You said it's a preventable condition?
Yeah, I'm saying research indicates that Ebola is a very preventable disease, but we keep on seeing, these outbreaks now and again. For example, in DRC, this is not the first or second time, it's the 8th time.
Yeah, actually, it's the 9th time, and DRC, we can say that it's the home of Ebola virus. This is where Ebola started way back in 1976, and since then, I think this is the 9th outbreak that they're having. So Ebola, yes, it's a preventable disease, and that is, though it's not very well understood where it comes from, but it's thought to be coming from the so-called bushmeat, for those who take monkey meat and other primates, also from the bats, the so-called fruit bats. And so from that aspect, we can say that it's generally preventable, but then we do not have a vaccine that we can be able to use to prevent up to now.
Now, Dr. Guto, Peter says this is a disease that is very hard to understand. Are we anywhere close to understanding this virus? And do you think the world might finally get a cure for this disease?
I think we look at the whole scope of what the viral infections that we have, and especially the hemorrhagic viruses, which Ebola is one of the most renowned ones. We currently understand the genetic makeup of these viruses and monitoring very closely whether there are any changes in the genetic makeup that might make them behave differently. And from the work that has been done before, which has recently been published, shows that despite the changes in the genetic makeup, in terms of disease symptoms that they cause, there's not much change in these different variants of the virus that have been characterized. And we know with time there's going to be a big drive towards getting a vaccine, because for these such diseases, if you can have vaccines, that will be the most robust way and economic way to control them. And we know that with this disease that comes in a short span of outbreaks and burns out, it becomes fairly tricky and difficult to mount development of vaccine, because at the later stage of developing a vaccine, you want it in an area where there's disease, but this is a disease that will come in and as an outbreak when you more or less are not ready. And what we currently have are vaccine candidates that have been developed to a later stage that needed to be possibly deployed when there's an outbreak. But I think this outbreak that is in DRC, we can say the DRC government, in support by WHO and other partners, have acted swiftly that we are almost at the point where this outbreak is contained. And some of the new vaccines that possibly would have been deployed might not be deployed at this time. But I think the scientific community is very clear that there are candidates that are being possibly put in the waiting that will more or less have something that we can use. And I know there are several drug candidates that people are going to try start testing out to see what will work and possibly, but making antiviral drugs is not one of the easiest things that most of the viruses, we still don't have very many drugs available.
And Peter, let me take you back to West Africa, to be specific, Nigeria. This is the most populous country in Africa. It's said that it's one of the success story of ending Ebola. What do you think? What are some of the measures they've put in place to make sure that that country stays Ebola free?
Yeah, what happened in Nigeria is that they were able to contain the Ebola outbreak from almost the index case. It had not spread into the community when the government mobilized resources to be able to contain it. You understand that for you to be able to manage Ebola well, you need a multifaceted approach that needs a mix, the right mix of the health workers and involving even the community, because there are several pillars that you must have in place for you to be able to contain Ebola. Ebola is a disease that usually thrives on the habits of the society because the way of transmission is through the body fluids. And you understand that once you have Ebola, you'll be having some symptoms like profuse sweating. You'll be having a lot of fever, diarrhea, and vomiting. And so if then you have a habit that then enables your people to touch each other like the handshake, for those of us who like giving each other a hug, then you can be sure that it's going to spread very fast. And for you to be able to correct some of these habits, then you need very strong social mobilization, communicating with the people down there so that you can be able to have behavior change. And then you must be able to have health workers who are well-versed on how they are supposed to protect themselves so that then they can be able to take care of these people and be able to cure them. And maybe the person from DRC can confirm to us, but from the literature I've learned that today there were 4 more cases that were confirmed to be infected with Ebola, and among them, 2 of them are health workers. And so sometimes it's quite difficult, especially when it's starting and it's the index case in that first place where you're going to get Ebola, because you understand that when somebody presents with fever and sweating and diarrhea and vomiting, that can be a symptom for so many conditions.
You never know if it's Ebola or something else. Well explained there, Peter. And Dr. Gutu, from Peter's explanation there, this seems like a very highly infectious disease. And this is a question we're getting from most of our viewers. Are we looking at a possibility of this virus, going global because people move from one place to another?
I think this is a very infectious agent, and this time round, what has happened within the Ikoro area, it is very clear that the authorities have more or less contained the spread of the virus from that region, and I think we are not seeing anything getting beyond that area, because if you can see, the area is fairly along River Congo and drains down towards Kinshasa, and I think if we don't see any cases being picked from Kinshasa, then we can say there's been quite a good containment that we are not going to see this going beyond the borders of DRC Congo. And I think this is one thing that we have to maintain a keen watch over and be alert across the region till we see that this has died off before anybody can stop doing the screening that is being done at the various border points or at the airports that is currently happening. Because this is an alert that we have to keep at every point to make sure that the spread is contained from within the epicenter where the outbreak started.
And let me engage Wachira once again, because this is a man who was literally served in the front line when it comes to this disease. Now, Wachira, from research again, it's clear that this is a virus that kills its host very quickly, especially human beings. Does that complicate further, chances of survival?
Yeah, it sure does. You understand that the case fatality rate of Ebola is about 50%, but has been documented to be somewhere from 25% to 90% in different cases. That is what gives an average of 50%. In Ebola, and you may be surprised that we are too worried about Ebola. But actually what is killing our cholera patients in Kenya, who by the way are quite a number, is the exact same way that an Ebola patient is going to die. For long, there has been this misnomer that because it's a hemorrhagic disease, that what is going to kill you is the hemorrhagic manifestation, where you are going to bleed from all orifices. But you'll come to find that if you look at especially the last outbreak in the West Africa, about 75 to 85% of the people died without even manifesting with the bleeding manifestations, and actually died from just diarrhea and vomiting, and they actually died of hypovolemic shock.
Now, Dr. Gutu, I would like you to demystify this for us. And those who are saying, this is not a human virus, it's a virus that is from, fruit bats. Those who are saying they're from apes, from monkeys to be specific. How true is that?
Yes, this is a virus that basically gets transmitted to human beings when they get in contact with wildlife, and especially and this seen also with other viruses, which this group of viruses exist in. They tend to occur in the wild, and we might have the bats harboring it because they can have it and not have any problems, and then they can spread it to the monkeys and the other non-human primates. And when human beings get in contact with these animals, and possibly we're going to do some cave watching and possibly bird watching, and you get into some caves that you might end up getting in contact with droppings from some of these bats, or sometimes we might be butchering some of these wild animals like the primates and get in contact with the fluids from these animals. If they are infected, then that's how people get infected. So basically it is getting in contact with these animals that possibly harbor the virus without any symptoms at all. And this is when they get into the human beings who cannot possibly tolerate the virus, then they develop the symptoms, and the human beings get in contact with other people, and this is what leads to the spread. And it is not a native virus that possibly the main reservoir is the human host. It is the other animals in the wild that are basically the host of this virus.
Clearly, we're talking about a very deadly virus here. Now, Peter, let me pose this question. I'm going to play it back to you, Dr. Gutu, as well. And let me start with Wachira first. Do you think enough is being done in this continent to fight, this virus? Because clearly, it's a very dangerous one. And do you think more needs to be done, especially in, research?
Yeah, I think for us, we should even start at the health systems. I think in Africa, it's a journey. It's a journey that we are walking to be able to have a good health system that can be able to respond to this. But also allow me to say that in that journey, then we must be able to appreciate the resources that we do have. Because we have the resources. Like now, we have, we are among the 2,000 health workers who actually have the expertise to be able to contain such an outbreak. But when it comes to a country like ours, you find that the health workers who are in West Africa, once they came back, actually the government never put them together so that they can form a task force, not even a task force, but an emergency workforce that can be responding to such outbreaks, even in our country, like the cholera outbreaks that we have had in several counties. So yes, we can be able to contain it, but for us to be able to do that, we must appreciate the resources we have and we must be able to utilize the resources we have so that we can be able to do this.
Dr. Gutu, let me give you the last word.
I think what one can say is that a lot is already being done in terms of trying to contain and possibly monitor these viruses. Like in Kenya, within Kenya, we have what we call the VHS lab, which is basically a WHO reference center for viral hemorrhagic fever monitoring, so that they can go when there's any outbreak or there's any possibility that there's a place that this can happen for any viral outbreaks, to go out, pick the samples, come back and characterize them and inform the health sector and the government basically what is happening, whether there's an outbreak or not, or what might be causing any disease outbreak that occurs. So these have been placed basically to monitor the occurrence of some of these outbreaks, and this has been going on for quite a while. And when you see the setup of the African CDC that is being put in place, one of the drivers is basically to try to get a way how we can get hold of these outbreaks that are happening and contain them early in time. And one of the things that is being put in place is basically to have a lot of surveillance across different countries. And one thing that is coming on is the One Health, because we know that a number of these diseases tend to overlap between animals and human beings, so that we don't segregate between diseases of animals and human beings, so that we can start monitoring what is happening in the wild. Some of this has been done in Kenya in some of the studies where we go out to look at the animals, that for the wild animals within the vegetation in the towns and even in the rural areas, to see what sort of viruses or bacteria they have that might possibly be harmful to human beings if they cross to the other side, so that we know what they carry around and know how to possibly develop some of the things, the tools that we might need to detect them and even to treat them and prevent them. So this is something that is work that is going on in the background. So I can say there's a lot being done, but there's still a lot of ground to be covered in terms of trying to stem out the occurrence of these outbreaks and really monitoring what is happening, especially in the vast areas which are forested, and you never know when parts of the population are moving into the forest or out of the forest, because these are the things that need to be basically be monitored, so that we can know if there's a time that people are likely to be moving to the forest, then we need to educate the community so that there are some protective measures they need to take, and if there are any symptoms they start exhibiting, they need to seek help, and rather than shy away from going to the health facilities, to make sure they get the appropriate care or the preventive measures that need to be put in place.
Well said, Dr. Gutu. Many thanks for your input. Dr. Bernard Zugutu is the Chief Researcher from Kemri, and Peter Bashir is a clinical officer who served both in Sierra Leone and outbreak there. Before we end our show tonight, remember today is a Thursday, and 24 years ago on a day like today, Nelson Mandela was sworn in as the first black president of South Africa. In his inaugural address, Mandela, who spent 27 years of his life as a political prisoner of the South African government, declared that, quote-unquote, the time for the healing of the wounds has come. Let's listen to that, part of that inauguration speech.
Each time one of us touches the soil of this land, we feel a sense of personal renewal. The national mood changes as the seasons change. We are moved by a sense of joy and exhilaration when the grass turns green and the flowers bloom. That spiritual and physical oneness we all share with this common homeland explains that the depth of the pain we all carried in our hearts as we saw our country tear itself apart in terrible conflict, and as we saw it spent, outlawed, and isolated by the peoples of the world, precisely because it had become the universal base of the pernicious ideology and practice of racism and racial oppression. We, the people of South Africa, feel fulfilled that humanity has taken us back into its bosom, that we, who were outlaws not so long ago, had today been given the rare privilege to be host to the nations of the world on our own soil.
That is the late Nelson Mandela making his inauguration speech there back in the year 1994. And that brings us to the end of our program tonight. Many thanks for watching. My name is Yusuf Ibrahim. I'll leave you with our proverb of the day. Bye-bye and have a